My name is Hugo Prescott, and I am 67 years old. I've spent most of my life behind the wheel of a truck, plying the roads of Georgia with loads of various caliber. 38 years behind the wheel is a long time, and my hands still remember the feel of the steering wheel, even when I'm just sitting in the window seat. Macon isn't the biggest town in the state, but it's been home to me since Dora and I decided to settle here back in the 80s. A small one-story house on a quiet street, not much, but it was enough. We were used to making do with little. Dora worked as a cashier in a supermarket, I worked as a driver, and together we gradually worked our way out of debt, improving our lives little by little. When our son Keith was born, we were over the moon. A late baby. Dora was already 36 at the time. I was 40. The doctors said the chances were almost nil, but fate had it differently. We both worked like hell to make sure the boy had a decent future. I took extra flights, went away for weeks at a time, returning only to see my son grow up while I was away. Keith was a bright boy, but he had a temper. He got his stubbornness from me. Dora always joked that if you put the two of us up against each other, the ground would crack from the strain. I guess that's why our relationship sometimes resembled a roller coaster. One minute we were best friends, the next we'd barely talk for weeks. Keith's adolescence coincided with the busiest years of my career. The company was expanding, flights were getting longer, and I was home less and less. Dora was holding up the front, but in the back of my mind I always knew I was missing something important. After high school, Keith went to a local college, studying information technology. I can't say I understood exactly what he was doing. Everything to do with computers is a dark forest to me. But he finished his studies and got a job at some firm that was involved in computer systems maintenance. Good income, office work, just like we dreamed of for him and Dora. And then Dora got sick. Pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis that makes the ground fall away from under your feet. 11 months of struggle, grueling and hopeless. I gave up long-haul flights, switched to local deliveries to be close by. Keith came every weekend from his apartment downtown. It was as if he and I had made an unspoken truce. For Dora's sake, we put aside all old grudges and misunderstandings. When Dora left, I was 59. Keith was 26, young and promising, but his eyes were as empty as mine. We hardly spoke for the first year, each grieving in his own way. I withdrew into myself, into our empty house, among the things that held Dora's scent. Sometimes when I came home from work, I called out to her on automatic, and then stood in the middle of the room, stunned by the silence. Keith, on the other hand, had gone to work. He'd moved up the ladder, gotten a promotion, and then he met Beatrice. She worked in the call center of an insurance company. Not a bad job, as I thought at the time. Tall, slim, with long blonde hair and a straight posture. She spoke curtly and loudly, as if she was used to not being listened to. The first time we met was in a restaurant. Keith had insisted on formal introductions. Beatrice was polite, smiling, asking the right questions, but I could sense some tension in her. Her gaze slid over me, over my hands, calloused from years of driving, over my worn jacket. After that meeting, I told Keith she seemed like a nice girl. I lied, because I saw the way his eyes lit up when he looked at her. 6 months later, they announced they were getting married. By that time, I had already retired. My lower back problems had finally knocked me off my game. My pension was modest, barely enough to pay for utilities and food. Health insurance ate up a significant portion of my income. At some point, I decided to sell my house to Dora and me. It was getting too big for one. Too many memories. Keith was looking for a place to live. He and Beatrice wanted something their own. And then I did something I'd regret more than once later. I gave them the money from the sale of the house as a down payment on their new place. The amount was decent, almost $50,000. The house they chose was in a good neighborhood in Macon, with a large lot and a porch. A young family should have a good start, I reasoned. Dora would approve. In return, Keith suggested I move in with them. The guest room would be fine as a bedroom for the old man. I agreed, though an inner voice warned me of possible problems. But I drowned it out. After all, this is my son, my blood. Things went well for the first few months. I had my own territory. I tried not to interfere with the young, helped with repairs and cleaning the yard. On weekends, I cooked breakfast for them. Dora had taught me how to make great pancakes. Beatrice was polite, though not verbose. Sometimes when I caught her glance, I felt something unpleasant, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. And then the little things began. First, Beatrice began to insinuate that I watched TV too loudly in the evenings. Then she said my shoes were out of place in the hallway. Then that she was annoyed by the smell of my cologne. Little remarks said with a strained smile gradually turned into open complaints. "Hugo, I wish you wouldn't touch my things in the kitchen," she said one morning when I was trying to make coffee. "I just wanted to make myself a cup of coffee, Beatrice," I replied, trying to sound peaceful. "You have a kettle in your room." Her voice was cold. "Use it." From that day on, I stopped using the kitchen when she was home. Warmed water in the electric kettle I bought with my own money, ate simple foods that didn't require cooking. Keith saw all this, but was silent. Occasionally, I caught something like guilt in his gaze, but he quickly averted his eyes. Beatrice began to invite her friends home, and I often heard her complaining about the difficult situation and the forced coexistence. One day she bluntly told one of them, "Do you know what a burden it is to have an old man at home? It's like having a child, only with no prospects." I pretended not to hear, but the words lodged deep in my heart. What am I a burden? After all I've done for Keith? After the money I'd invested in their house? That night I tried to talk to my son. "Keith, we need to talk about Beatrice," I began when we were alone in the living room. "Dad, I know you two don't always get along." He looked tired. "But she's just getting used to a new situation." "She treats me like a nuisance," I said bluntly. "I've heard what she says to her friends." Keith sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me. "She didn't mean it. It's our first house, you know? She wants everything to be perfect." "And I'm the imperfection in the picture?" The bitterness in my voice. "No, Dad, not like that." He put his hand on my shoulder, but he didn't look me in the eye. "Just give her time." But time was only making things worse. After their wedding, which they celebrated modestly at a local restaurant, it was as if Beatrice stopped pretending. Her attitude towards me became openly hostile. My belongings were accidentally moved or missing altogether. Once I found pictures of me and Dora in a trash can, Beatrice said she was cleaning, and they looked old and unwanted. Keith became increasingly distant. When he returned from work, he would lock himself in his room or spend time with Beatrice. Our conversations became shorter and more superficial. I could feel the wall growing between us, and I didn't know how to break through it. The situation reached a peak when Beatrice decided to convert my room into a home office. I returned from a walk and found her moving my stuff around. "What's going on?" I asked, standing in the doorway. "Keith and I have decided we need a home office," she answered without even turning her head. "You can move into the guest room in the basement. It even has a window." "Beatrice, this is my room." I tried to speak calmly, though I was seething inside. "We agreed I'd live here." "Change of plans, Hugo." She finally looked at me. "Keith agrees. He thinks you'll be more comfortable in the basement, more privacy." I waited until the evening when Keith got home from work. I tried to talk to him alone, but Beatrice sensed it and wouldn't leave his side. Eventually, the conversation took place over dinner, in front of her. "Keith, did you really agree to put me in the cellar?" I asked him directly. He hesitated, glanced at his wife, then back at me. "Dad, it's not a basement in a bad way. It's a nice room with a window." "I invested $50,000 in that house," I interrupted him, feeling the betrayal burning inside me. "The money from the sale of the house where you grew up, where your mother and I lived. And now I'm supposed to live in a basement?" "Don't be dramatic, Hugo," Beatrice intervened. "It's a practical decision. We need space to work." "And I need dignity," I replied, looking directly at my son. "Keith, look at me. Is this right? Is this how your mother raised you to treat your father?" He was silent, his eyes lowered into his plate. Beatrice put her hand on his shoulder, a possessive gesture, not a comforting one. "We're all adults here," she said. "We need to make practical decisions. If you don't like our conditions, Hugo, you can always find another place to live." Her words hung in the air. Keith still didn't look up. I got up from the table, leaving my dinner uneaten, and went to my room. I lay awake all night remembering holding Keith in my arms as a newborn, teaching him to ride his bike, sitting by his bedside when he was sick. Where did that connection go? When did my son turn into this silent man who can't stand up for his own father? In the morning, I went for a walk earlier than usual. I couldn't be in a house that had become so foreign. I wandered the streets of Macon for hours, trying to collect my thoughts. At one point, I sat down on a park bench, watching the children and their parents playing. The cycle of life. Parents taking care of the children, then the children taking care of the parents. But something went wrong in our case. When I returned, the front door was locked. My key didn't fit. The locks had been changed. And on the doorstep were my things, packed in 2 suitcases and several cardboard boxes. On top was a note. "Sorry, Dad, it's best for everyone. I'll call you later. Keith." That's how I ended up on the street at 67, thrown out of the house I helped him buy by my own son. I stood in the middle of the street, looking at my belongings stacked neatly by the door of the house I'd invested the last of the money from the sale of my and Dora's home. The sun was blazing, a typical Macon summer day. Sweat ran down my back, but the cold inside was stronger than the heat outside. Betrayal burned cold, stiffening my movements. For a few minutes, I just stared at the house, unable to comprehend what had happened. Then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my son's number. Tone, tone, and finally his voice, tense with fake notes of concern. "Dad? Did you get my note?" "Keith!" My voice sounded hoarse like a stranger. "What's going on? Why is my stuff outside?" Pause. I could hear his breathing and someone's whispering in the background. Beatrice, of course. "Dad, Beatrice and I have discussed this situation at length. We think it would be best for you to live on your own. You've always been an independent person, and—" "Stop it," I cut him off. "Don't justify it by taking care of me. I've been living with you for less than a year, and in all that time your wife has been doing everything she can to get me out of the house." "That's not true, Dad." His voice became harder. "Beatrice has tried very hard, but you never accepted her, constantly criticized her, interfered in our affairs." I gasped at the unfairness of those words. When did I criticize Beatrice? When have I interfered? I practically lived like a ghost in their house, trying to stay out of sight, out of the way. "Keith, you know that's not true. I did everything I could to get along with you guys. I even agreed to move into the basement. But you acted like you were doing us a favor." Now he's clearly repeating someone else's words. "You keep mentioning the money you put into the house as if we owe you for the rest of our lives." "I mentioned money once when your wife decided to evict me from my room." I tried to stay calm, but I was seething inside. "Keith, are you even listening to me? This isn't like you. You've never been this violent." There was another pause. Then I heard someone pick up the phone. "Hugo." Beatrice's voice sounded businesslike, as if she were talking to a problem client at work. "Let's not complicate things. We've put all your things together. We haven't forgotten anything. Keith even put an extra $500 in an envelope. You'll find it in the side pocket of the suitcase. That should be enough to get you settled in for the first time. $500. That's what they thought my life was worth. My years of caring for my son, my contribution to their home. "Let me talk to Keith," I demanded. "He can't come over right now," Beatrice cut her off. "This situation is very difficult for him. You must understand. We'll call you back later." And she hung up. I stood on the sidewalk with the phone in my hand as if struck by thunder. Cars were passing by. People were walking by. Ordinary life was going on, but mine was collapsing before my eyes. Breathing heavily, I sat down on one of the suitcases. What now? Where to go? I had a small pension, but the next paycheck was still a week away. Barely $100 in my wallet. I started digging in the side pocket of my suitcase. Indeed, there was an envelope with $500 bills in it. I felt disgusted, but I had no choice. I took the money. Then I looked around. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, stood at her gate and looked in my direction. I nodded, trying to keep my dignity, and took the lightest suitcase in one of the boxes. The rest I had to leave behind, for at my age you can't go far with such a load. "Mr. Prescott, can I help you?" Mrs. Patterson called out to me, heading in my direction. "No, thank you," I answered, feeling the color of shame flood my face. "I'm just moving." "In the middle of the day? Without a car?" She glanced back and forth at me in the house. clearly guessing what had happened. It just happened. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't do it. I'll be back for the rest of my stuff. Let me help. She was already there, taking one of the boxes with determination. Where are you going? I didn't know what to say. I had no plan, no direction. I hadn't decided yet, I finally admitted. Maybe a motel on Riverside. Mrs. Patterson pressed her lips together, but said nothing. Together we took my things to her yard, then went back for the rest. All this time I expected Keith to look out the window, to come out on the porch, to say it was a mistake. But the house stood silent, with the curtains drawn, as if no one were there. Mr. Prescott, said Mrs. Patterson, when all my belongings were in her yard, won't you sit down for a minute? I'll make some tea. I wanted to refuse. My pride demanded that I leave this place, this house, this street, where I had been so humiliated. But fatigue got the better of me. Thank you, I nodded. Just for a few minutes. We sat on her porch drinking tea. She didn't ask any questions, and I was grateful for her silence. There was nothing to ask, everything was clear. The story was as old as the world. Young wife, weak-willed son, unwanted old man. 20 minutes later, I thanked Mrs. Patterson and hailed a cab. She offered to leave my things with her until I found a permanent home, and I accepted. I took with me only one suitcase with the essentials. The Pine Motel on Riverside wasn't one of the best, but it was clean and inexpensive. I rented a room for a week, paying $400 at once, almost all the money Keith had given me. The room was small, with a broken bed and an old TV, but I had a roof over my head, and I didn't need much more than that. I spent the first night sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at one point. My thoughts were many, but they all revolved around one question. How had Keith and I gotten to this point? Where had I gone wrong as a father? What had I done wrong? I thought back to his childhood, an ordinary boy, sometimes naughty, sometimes stubborn, but generally a good kid. I remembered reading him books at bedtime on the rare days I was home, how I taught him how to hammer nails and fix a bicycle, taking him to the local team's baseball games. Yeah, I wasn't the perfect dad. I worked a lot, I was away a lot, but I did what I could to provide for my family, and Keith seemed to understand that. At least that's what I thought. She was the link between us, softening our personalities, smoothing out the sharp edges. When she died, something broke in our family, and then Beatrice came along, and everything went completely downhill. The second day, I forced myself to leave the room. I had to do something to move forward. I went to the nearest cafe, got a coffee and a sandwich, sat by the window. I took out my phone and looked at the screen. No missed calls, no messages. Keith hadn't tried to contact me. Eventually, I dialed his number myself. The phone was off or out of range. I left a voicemail message. Keith, this is Dad. I'm at a motel on Riverside. I need to talk to you. Please call me back. All day I wandered around town, going into stores just to kill time, sitting in the park watching passers-by. In the evening I returned to the motel. No calls. On the third day I couldn't take it anymore and drove to their house. I don't know what I expected. Maybe Keith would come out to apologize, tell me it was a terrible mistake. But when I pulled up in the cab, I saw that there was no car in the driveway. No one was home. I rang the doorbell of the neighboring house. It was opened by a man I'd seen a couple of times, but didn't know by name. Hello, I began. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Keith Prescott's father from next door. Do you know when they'll be back? The man gave me a hard look. They went away for the weekend, he said finally. They said something about a trip to the lake. They'll be back Sunday night, I guess. I thanked him and left. So while I'd been in motels, Keith and Beatrice had gone to the lake. Bitterness flooded me with renewed vigor. Back at the motel, I got really drunk for the first time in years. I bought a bottle of cheap whiskey from the store across the street and methodically emptied it, sitting in the dim light of the only lamp. The alcohol brought no relief. It only made the pain dull, blurred, but no less real. The next morning greeted me with a brutal hangover and the clear realization that I couldn't go on like this. I needed to pull myself together to find a way out of this situation. I had less than $100 left. My motel room was paid for 4 more days. During that time, I needed to find more permanent housing and maybe some part-time work. I started with the newspaper, old-fashioned but familiar to a man of my generation. I looked through the ads for rooms and apartments for rent, but everything I saw was either too expensive or in areas of Macon where I wouldn't risk settling. Sunday night, I tried calling Keith again. This time he answered, voice sleepy, a little irritated. Dad, do you know what time it is? I looked at the clock. 10 o'clock at night. It's not that late. Keith, we need to talk, I said, trying to sound calm. I want to understand what's going on between us. There was a pause, a rustle, muffled voices. He was saying something to Beatrice, and she was responding. Dad, this isn't a good time, he finally said. We just got back from the lake, and we're tired. I just got back from the street you put me on, I said. And I'm tired as hell, too. Keith, what happened to you? How could you do that to your father? I didn't mean for it to turn out this way, he said, uncertainty in his voice. But you and Beatrice, you didn't get along. I was caught between two fires. And you chose her, I said. I understand. She's your wife. But couldn't you have handled it differently? Talk to me. Find a compromise. We tried, Dad. He sounded almost accusatory now. But you're always so, adamant. You didn't want to accept Beatrice. Didn't try to work things out with her? I gasped in indignation. Does he really believe what he's saying? Or did Beatrice put those thoughts in his head? Keith, I have done my best to get along with you. I've yielded in every argument. I've practically never left my room to stay out of the way. I endured your wife's humiliation in silence because I didn't want to embarrass you. And that's how you repaid me, by throwing me out on the street like a piece of junk. You're exaggerating. His voice got higher. Nobody threw you out. We gave you money, packed you up. Oh yes, very thoughtful, I grinned bitterly. It was especially touching to find pictures of myself and my mom in the garbage before you evicted me. A very caring attitude. Silence on the other end. Then, Dad, it was an accident. Beatrice didn't mean to. That's enough, Keith, I interrupted him. I don't want to hear any more about what Beatrice didn't mean. I'm calling to tell you one thing. You are my son, and I will always love you. But what you did is unforgivable. You betrayed not only me, but also your mother's memory. I heard him sigh heavily. Dad, let's not be dramatic. You can handle yourself. I know you can. You've always been strong, independent. Maybe it's for the best. You'll be able to live for yourself, not... Goodbye, Keith, I said, and hung up. I sat for a long time, staring at the wall opposite. The phone was silent. Keith didn't call back. It was the end. The end of a relationship I had built and nurtured for almost 30 years. The end of the family that had once been my raison d'etre. The next morning I got up early, packed my bags, and headed to the real estate agency. I needed to find a room I could afford on my modest pension. The agent, a young woman with tired eyes, showed me several options from photos. Everything was either too expensive or too shabby. Do you have any special requirements? She asked when we had already gone through a dozen options. A clean place where I can live decently on a $1,020 pension, I answered. Is that possible in Macon? She tapped her pencil on the table thoughtfully. There is one option. It's not the best neighborhood, but it's a decent house. A room in a house with a shared kitchen and bathroom. $550 a month, including utilities. It was almost half my pension, but I had no choice. I'd like to see it, I nodded. The house was an old but well-maintained two-story building on a quiet street on the east side of Macon. The room was small, with a narrow bed and dresser, but clean. There were 4 other people living in the house, all men about my age, according to the landlady, Mrs. Welch, a stern-looking woman in her 60s. The rules are simple, she explained. No alcohol, no women for the night, quiet after 10 o'clock. Cook your own food, clean up after yourself. Once a week, general cleaning of the common areas, one by one. I agreed to all the terms and paid the first month's rent plus a deposit, almost all the money I had. Mrs. Welch gave me a key and left me alone in the room that was now my new home. I sat down on the bed, pulled out my cell phone. I wanted to call Keith to tell him where I lived now, but instead I just sent a quick text with the address. There was no reply. So began my new life as a lonely old man in a strange house, betrayed by my own son. 2 weeks in a rented room stretched into eternity for me. Every day was similar to the previous one. Getting up at 6 in the morning, a habit left over from my driving days. Eating a meager breakfast in the communal kitchen, taking long walks around the city to kill time, and returning to the tiny room where the ceiling pressed down on me with an unbearable weight. The housemates turned out to be not bad people, lonely old men like me. Roger, a former mailman who'd worked at the Macon post office for 35 years. Vince, who had once kept a machine shop but went broke during the recession. Thomas, a retired accountant, the most silent of them all. And Bert, a former gym teacher with bad knees and undying optimism. They accepted me into their quiet circle without question, as if realizing that everyone here was entitled to their secrets and their pain. In the evenings, we sometimes gathered in the living room, watching old movies or sports broadcasts. We didn't talk much about the weather, sports, local news. We didn't ask about the past. We didn't wonder about the future. Existed in a strange suspended state. No longer part of an active life, but not yet ready to give up completely. Keith never called back. I checked my phone every hour, but the screen remained blank. I dialed his number a few times, but always reset before the dial tone went off. Pride prevented me from taking the first step toward reconciliation, not after what he'd done to me. By the end of the second week, my financial situation had become critical. I had paid for my room up front, but there was literally pennies left for food. My pension was due in 10 days, and my pocket was jingling with change. Barely $5. Neighbors, noticing that I had stopped cooking in the common kitchen, began to invite me to join their meals. I refused, making ridiculous excuses. I had already eaten in town. My stomach was upset. I had no appetite. But you can't fool hunger. At night, I woke up with a rumbling in my stomach, and during the day, I began to feel dizzy. On the 16th day of my stay at Mrs. Welch's house, I wandered around Macon for no particular purpose. I went into a supermarket just to warm myself, the fall wind blowing through my old jacket. I wandered aimlessly between the shelves, looking at products I couldn't afford. I had $3.17 in my pocket, all that was left of my savings. On the way out of the store, I noticed a stall selling lottery tickets. I'd never bought them before. I thought they were a waste of money. Dora sometimes dabbled, buying them on occasion, laughingly checking the results. "One day we'll be rich, Hugo," she said, not believing it herself. And now I was standing in front of the stall with her voice in my head. Without realizing what I was doing, I took out the rest of my money and handed it to the clerk. "One ticket, please. The cheapest one." The clerk, a full woman with bright red hair, took my crumpled bills and change and counted them. "For $3.17, you can get a lucky horseshoe or a triple jackpot," she said, pointing to a display case. "Whatever," I shrugged. "Let's go with the horseshoe." She handed me a bright yellow ticket, and I absent-mindedly thanked her and slipped it into my pocket. I was now officially at zero, not a dime in my pocket, 9 days away from retirement. But I felt strangely relieved, as if this small act of rebellion against rationality, this utterly senseless act, had given me back some semblance of control over my life. Back in my room, I didn't even check the ticket. I tossed it on the nightstand and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts swirled around Keith, Beatrice, our last conversation. I ran through various scenarios in my head. What would have changed if I'd said this or that, acted differently? But in my heart, I knew that the outcome was a foregone conclusion from the moment Beatrice entered my son's life. That evening, Roger knocked on my door and invited me to dinner. He'd prepared a stew of meat and vegetables. The smell wafted into my room and made my stomach clench in a painful cramp. This time I agreed. Pride is good until you start to faint. At dinner, Bert told his usual stories about his life as a teacher. Vince argued with him on every occasion. Their eternal confrontation was something of a ritual. Roger was silently serving refills, and Thomas made the occasional comment that made everyone laugh. I sat among these people, strangers, but who accepted me without question, and felt a strange calmness. Not happiness, no, but something akin to humility. Perhaps this is my new life. Perhaps I could get used to it. After dinner, we settled down in the living room to watch TV, as usual. There was a baseball game going on, the Macon team against some guys from Atlanta. No one was watching the score, just the usual background for an evening nap. At halftime, they showed the news, and among other things, a story about winning the lottery. Someone in Macon had hit the $10 million jackpot. The announcer said with feigned enthusiasm that the ticket had been purchased at the fresh supermarket on West Oak Street and that the winner had not yet been announced. Somebody's lucky, Bert yawned. I've been buying tickets for 30 years, and nothing. Lotteries are a tax on people who don't know math, Thomas said, still doing the crossword puzzle. Oh, come on, you nerd, Vince chuckled. Somebody wins. I listened to their bickering half-heartedly, thinking about my ticket on the nightstand. The Fresh on West Oak was the same store I'd been to today. Funny coincidence. Later in my room, I remembered the ticket. I took it out of my jacket pocket, twirled it in my hands. It was a yellow lucky horseshoe with a silver security stripe that had to be wiped off with a coin. I smirked, shook my head. That's what I'd come to, the last of my money in the wind. I didn't have a coin, so I used the room key. I slowly peeled off the protective layer, revealing a series of numbers. Then I reached into my pocket for my glasses. Age was getting to me, and the small numbers were blurring. There were 6 numbers on the ticket: 4, 17, 23, 35, 42, 51. I frowned, trying to remember what numbers had been called out on the news. Something similar, it seemed, but I wasn't sure. Going downstairs, I peeked into the living room. The TV was still on, but the room was empty. Everyone had gone to their rooms. I switched to the news channel and waited for the lottery story to repeat. When the announcer called out the winning numbers, I felt the ground go from under my feet. 4, 17, 23, 35, 42, 51. An exact match. I stared at the TV screen, not believing my eyes. Then at the ticket in my trembling hand. Then again on the screen. I, Hugo Prescott, a 67-year-old penniless retiree, had just won $10 million. My first impulse was to scream, to wake the whole house, to call Keith. But something stopped me, some inner feeling, an instinct for self-preservation. I turned off the TV and walked slowly up to my room, clutching the ticket in my fist so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't sleep a wink all night. I lay staring at the ceiling, numbers and possibilities spinning in my head. $10 million, a sum that would completely change my life. I would be able to buy a house, not a rented room, but a real house just for me. I'll be able to travel, try everything I've been putting off. I'll be able to live without counting every penny. And I could show Keith and Beatrice what a mistake they'd made in throwing me out of their lives. The thought burned with a sweet bitterness. Not that I wanted revenge, no, but I couldn't forget their betrayal so easily. By morning, I had made a decision. No hasty action, no loud statements. Everything had to be done thoughtfully, one step at a time. The first thing I did was to go to the library, the only place where I could use the internet for free. I sat down at a computer in the far corner and started looking for information on how to win the lottery. It turned out that the winner had to go to the lottery's main office in Atlanta, show a ticket and ID. Large winnings are paid either in a lump sum, but then the amount is smaller, or in equal installments over 20 years. I also learned that in most states, including Georgia, the names of lottery winners are publicly posted. That made me wary. I didn't want publicity. I didn't want all of Macon to know about my winnings. And I especially didn't want Keith and Beatrice to know about it, not until I was ready to tell them myself. Further searching led me to an interesting discovery. In some states, winners can remain anonymous if they receive their winnings through a trust or LLC. In Georgia, this was also possible, but required the help of a lawyer. Lawyers cost money, which I didn't have yet, but if I wanted to remain anonymous, there was no other way. Leaving the library, I headed for the nearest ATM. I inserted my card, asked for the balance $123.56. All of my savings. A ridiculous amount compared to what I would soon have, but it was critical right now. I withdrew $100 and went looking for a lawyer. There were several law firms in Macon, but most looked too posh for my modest budget. Eventually, I stopped in front of an unremarkable office with a sign that read, Mortimer Pincus Legal Services. Modest but solid. Mr. Pincus was a short, balding man in his 50s with shrewd eyes behind thick glasses. He listened carefully to my story, nodding occasionally and making notes in his notebook. "So you've won the lottery and want to remain anonymous," he summarized when I finished. "That can be arranged, Mr. Prescott. We'll set up a trust that will be the beneficiary of the winnings. Your name will not appear on any public record." "How much will it cost?" I asked, clutching the rest of the money in my pocket. Mr. Pincus gave me a sum that took my breath away. $2,000. "I realize that's a lot of money," he said, noticing my confusion. "But considering the size of your winnings, it's a reasonable investment in your privacy." I explained my situation, that I was practically broke until I received my winnings. Mr. Pincus hesitated, tapping his pen on the table. "Here's what I propose," he finally said. "I'll take a token down payment now. Say $50. The rest you'll pay after you get your winnings. How about that?" I gratefully agreed. We signed the agreement. I gave him $50 and, most importantly, the lottery ticket. He gave me a receipt and assured me that he would start the procedure immediately. "It will take 2 or 3 days to set up the trust," he explained. "Then you and I will go together to Atlanta, to the lottery office. I'll represent the trust, and you'll be present as a consultant so we can keep you anonymous." I spent the next 3 days on pins and needles. I ate, slept, went for walks, but it was all a blur. My thoughts kept returning to the winnings, to how my life would change. I made mental lists of what I would do with the money, and invariably the first item was to buy the house across the street from Keith and Beatrice's. The idea took me completely over, living right across the street from them, enjoying my new life in front of them, not letting them forget what they had done to me. On the fourth day, Mr. Pincus called. The paperwork was ready, the trust had been set up. New Opportunities Fund was the name it was called on the paperwork. We agreed to meet the next morning and travel to Atlanta together. The trip went smoothly. Mr. Pincus drove his Volvo with confidence, and all along the way he told me about the procedure for claiming the winnings, about taxes, which would eat up a significant portion of the amount, but still leave more than enough, and about the need for financial planning. "Many lottery winners lose all their money within a few years," he said. "They don't know how to manage such sums. They give in to impulsive desires, unwise investments, and pressure from family and friends." I assured him that I wasn't going to spend the money. "I have a clear plan: to buy a house, to ensure a comfortable old age, and perhaps to travel a little." The lottery office welcomed us with open arms. It's not every day that someone comes in for a $10 million jackpot. Mr. Pincus presented all the necessary documents, explained that he was acting on behalf of the trust. I was introduced as a consultant to the trust. No one even suspected that I was the real winner. After checking the ticket and ID, Mr. Pincus presented his own as a representative of the trust. We were offered the choice of receiving a lump sum payment of about $5.5 million after taxes or annual payments of $400,000 for 25 years. Mr. Pincus and I discussed the matter beforehand and decided to opt for the lump sum payment. At my age, there was no point in waiting 25 years. It took several hours to complete all the paperwork. Finally, we were informed that the money would be transferred to the trust account within 14 business days. Mr. Pincus had already opened a special account for this purpose. On the way back, I felt strangely light. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't rich. Money was only on paper for now. But the very knowledge that everything was about to change filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in years. "What do you plan to do in the near future?" Mr. Pincus asked me as we drove into Macon. "Nothing much," I answered. "I'm going to live as usual until the money comes in. Then I'll start looking for a house." "That's a smart decision," he nodded approvingly. "The fewer people who know about your winnings, the better. In my experience, Mr. Prescott, money changes people, and not always for the better." I thought about those words as I went back to my room at Mrs. Welch's house. Money changes people. Will it change me? Would I become a different person with access to millions? And more importantly, how will other people feel about me when they find out about my new status? Well, if everything goes according to plan, no one will ever find out, at least not right away. I'll proceed cautiously, gradually. My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. The number was unfamiliar, and I was about to hang up, but at the last moment I answered. Mr. Prescott, a woman's voice businesslike, but with a hint of nervousness. This is Lisa Johnson from the Macon Daily. I'd like to talk to you about your recent lottery win. I got chills. How did she know? Mr. Pincus swore the information would remain confidential. You have the wrong number, I said as calmly as I could. I didn't win anything. But our source at the lottery office says that you accompanied the lawyer who claimed the jackpot, she insisted, and that the ticket was bought at a store near where you live. That's a lot of coincidences, don't you think? I repeat, you are mistaken. My voice trembled, betraying my excitement. I had nothing to do with this winnings. Mr. Prescott, if you'll give us an exclusive interview, we'll... I hung up. My heart was pounding like crazy. Somehow the information had gotten out. Someone in the lottery office had put two and two together, realized that the trust consultant was the real winner. A minute later, the phone rang again. A different number. I didn't answer it. Then another call. And another. They wouldn't leave me alone. Towards evening, Mr. Pincus called. He was furious. He too had been harassed by the reporters. Someone at the lottery office leaked the information, he said. It's illegal. I'll file a complaint. But the damage has already been done. I'm afraid your anonymity is at risk. What should I do? I asked, pacing the room nervously. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Don't confirm or deny anything. If they harass you personally, say you'll go to the police. You have a right to privacy. I took his advice. I turned off my cell phone, didn't leave the house all day. Mrs. Welch reported that some people came by asking about me, but she turned them away, saying she didn't give out information about her tenants. The next day, an article appeared in the local paper. Mysterious lottery winner. Who hit the 10 million jackpot? My name wasn't in it, but there were enough hints. Age, neighborhood, mentioned that the winner had recently been in a difficult life situation. Fortunately, the article did not contain photos, but it was clear that the journalists would not leave until they got their scoop. On the third day after the Atlanta trip, I got a call I didn't expect. Keith. I stared at the phone screen for a long time, hesitating to answer. Finally, suppressing an inner trembling, I pressed the green button. Dad? It's you. My son's voice sounded unusually soft, even ingratiating. How are you? I was so worried. Worried? I couldn't hide my surprise. Not a single call in 3 weeks, and suddenly you're worried? I wanted to call, really, he said quickly, as if he was afraid I'd hang up. I just didn't know what to say. After the last time we talked, I was ashamed. What's changed, Keith? I asked you straight out. Why are you calling now? A pause. I could almost see him choosing his words, mentally composing the right answer. I read an article in the paper, he said at last, about the lottery winner. There were a lot of coincidences, and I thought, it was you, wasn't it? That's what it was. No concern for his abandoned father, no remorse, no desire to reconcile. It's just greed, naked interest. What if it was? I asked coldly. Dad, I'm so happy for you. His enthusiasm seemed as fake as plastic flowers. I mean, this is wonderful. Such luck. It's wonderful, I agreed, feeling the bitterness rise to my throat, especially considering that a month ago I'd been a homeless old man, thrown out on the street by my own son. A heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Dad, I made a mistake. Beatrice and I, we shouldn't have done that. I realize that now. I'm sorry, please. The apology I'd been waiting weeks for now sounded hollow and insincere. It was a convenient coincidence that my remorse came just as money was coming into my life. Keith, let's be honest, I said, trying to speak calmly. You're not calling because you're ashamed of your behavior. You're calling because you think I won the lottery, and you want to know if it's true. No, Dad, you're wrong, his voice shook. I'm really sorry about what happened. I acted like the last unworthy son, and I want to make it right. How exactly do you want to fix it? I asked. Maybe we could meet. Talk in person? I'd come to you, or you could come to our house. Beatrice wants to apologize too. Beatrice. Of course she does. I'm sure she was the one who insisted on calling as soon as she read the article. She saw an opportunity for profit and immediately changed her attitude towards her unwanted father-in-law. Tell Beatrice I got her apology, I said dryly. And yours too. I need to think, Keith. This isn't a good time for a meeting. Of course, Dad, I understand. He was clearly trying to hide his disappointment. Just know that you're always welcome here. Our house is your house. The bitter irony of those words didn't escape me. Our home is your home, the very house they kicked me out of. I'll call you later, Keith, I said, and ended the call without waiting for an answer. I put the phone away and sat in silence for a long time, digesting what had happened. So the rumor of my winnings had reached Keith and Beatrice, and the result was sudden remorse, a desire to reconcile. How predictable, how pathetic. Beatrice called the same day. I didn't answer. She left a message, a sugary, sweet voice full of fake concern and remorse. Hugo, we are so worried about you. Please give us a call. We want to make things right. The days that followed brought more calls. From Keith, from Beatrice, even from some of their friends I barely knew. Everyone suddenly remembered I existed. Everyone wanted to meet, to talk, to connect. I didn't answer. I waited for the money to be deposited into the trust account. Then I'd start acting on my plan. And the first part of that plan was to buy the house across the street from Keith and Beatrice's, to show them what a mistake they'd made. The money was deposited into the trust account 12 days later. Mr. Pincus called me early in the morning, his voice as solemn as if he were announcing the birth of a child. Mr. Prescott, congratulations. The funds have been received in full. After all deductions and commissions, your net amount is $5,382,000. I was silent for a long time, trying to comprehend that figure. 5 million. More money than I'd made in my entire life, adding up the paychecks of 38 years of truck driving. Are you still here, Mr. Prescott? Pincus's voice brought me back to reality. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's just, it's a lot of money. It is a lot, he agreed. Now you're going to need a financial advisor. I have some reliable contacts if you like. Later, I replied. First, I need to solve the housing issue. I want to buy a house. A specific house or just a nice property? Specific. On Maple Street, across from number 42. Mr. Pincus asked nothing about my choice, and I was grateful for his tact. We agreed to meet at his office after lunch to set up a power of attorney and a bank card linked to the trust account. That way I could spend the money without revealing my status as a lottery winner. Leaving Mrs. Welch's house that afternoon, I had mixed feelings. Over the past weeks, the place had become something of a refuge for me. Although it was cramped and sparse, it was peaceful. My neighbors, lonely old men like me, didn't ask questions, didn't pry. We shared quiet evenings in front of the TV, conversations about weather and sports, joint dinners on weekends, a kind of family of lost people. I decided not to tell them about the winnings, at least not yet. I just told them that I had found a suitable place to live and would be moving soon. They took the news without much surprise. People our age are used to loss and separation. After meeting Mr. Pincus, I felt differently. The plastic card in my pocket, ordinary in appearance, gave me access to millions. I could go to any store, buy anything without looking at the price tag. I could get on an airplane and fly anywhere, stay in the best hotel without thinking about the bill. A freedom I'd never dreamed of. But I had a more specific goal in mind, and I was headed straight for it. On Maple Street, directly across from Keith and Beatrice's house, stood a two-story colonial-style house. White, with blue shutters, a large porch, and a manicured lawn. I'd noticed it the first day I'd been put on the street. The for sale sign had appeared on the lawn only a week ago, as if fate itself had thrown me this chance. I called the number listed and made an appointment with a realtor for the next morning. I spent the night in a motel. I didn't want to go back to Mrs. Welch's place, knowing I'd soon be gone for good. In the morning, I put on my best shirt, not that I had much choice, and showed up 10 minutes early for the appointment. The realtor, a young woman named Ashley, clearly didn't expect to see an older man in shabby clothes. Her smile was professionally polite, but there was doubt in her eyes. Mr. Prescott, pleased to meet you, she extended her hand. I understand you're interested in this house. Yes, very much so, I shook her hand. Can we take a look at it now? She walked me through the house, telling me about its features. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a modern kitchen, a basement with its own access to the garden, a 2-car garage, The house was built in 1999, but was completely renovated 5 years ago. The previous owners had moved to another state because of work, so the price was slightly below market, only $490,000. As Ashley talked, I looked out the living room window. There was a great view of Keith and Beatrice's house across the street. I could see their driveway, the porch, even part of the second-floor bedroom window. "The house is gorgeous," I said, turning to Ashley. "I want to buy it." She blinked, clearly not expecting such determination. "That's wonderful. Maybe you'd like to think it over again. See what other options you have for comparison." "No, this is the house I want," I insisted, "and I'm willing to pay full price, in cash." Now she looked truly stunned. "Cash? Are you sure?" "Positive. I'd like to finalize the deal as soon as possible. Say this week?" It seemed to dawn on her, now that she was not just an old man with a quirk, but a serious buyer. Her tone changed instantly, becoming more respectful. "Of course, Mr. Prescott. With a cash payment, we can speed up the process considerably. We'll need to prepare the paperwork, do the standard due diligence." "Do whatever is necessary," I nodded. "My lawyer, Mr. Pincus, will represent me in this transaction. Here are his contacts." I handed her the business card Mr. Pincus had given me the day before. The next 3 days passed in paperwork. Mr. Pincus was invaluable, checking every line in the contract and making sure my interests were fully protected. The money was transferred from the trust account directly to the sellers without any questions or delays. And on the fourth day, I was the owner of my dream home. The keys were handed to me by Ashley herself, with a big smile and a bottle of champagne as a gift. "Congratulations on your purchase, Mr. Prescott. Welcome to Maple Street." I thanked her and closed the door, stood in the middle of the empty living room listening to the echo of my footsteps. My house, my own house, bought with my money. Not a rented room, not someone else's corner, but a whole house that I could furnish to my liking, where I could live by my own rules. And most importantly, a home from which I could watch Keith and Beatrice, watch their lives unfold, how they reacted to my sudden appearance as a wealthy neighbor. The first thing I ordered was furniture, simple but good. A bed, a sofa, a dining table, some armchairs, bookshelves. Then I hired a cleaning company for a general cleaning, although the house was already in excellent condition. I ordered groceries delivered, filling the refrigerator and pantry with everything I could dream of. After weeks of semi-starvation, it felt like a real feast. I hadn't forgotten about my long-time dream of owning an automobile. All my life I had driven trucks, heavy and clumsy, dreaming of someday driving a real sports car. And now that dream could come true. At the Ford dealership, I was greeted with the same skepticism that Ashley had initially shown me. An older man in cheap clothes interested in a Mustang? The salesman looked at me, unsure if I was worth their time. But I was persistent, and eventually one of them, a young guy named Tyler, decided to help. "What kind of model are you looking for, sir?" "The most powerful," I answered. "I've been waiting my whole life for the chance to drive a real beast." Tyler smiled, thinking I was joking, but he led me to a red Mustang Shelby GT, the latest model. I walked around the car, admiring its aggressive lines, wide wheels, and chrome details. I opened the door, got behind the wheel. The leather seat took me in its embrace. The dashboard flickered with lights. The steering wheel fell into my hands as if it had been created especially for me. "How much?" I asked without getting out of the car. Tyler named the price $76,000, an amount that would have seemed astronomical to me a month ago. "I'll take it," I said simply. Tyler laughed nervously, thinking I was still joking. But when I pulled out my bank card and told him I was ready to pay for the car right now, his face stretched with surprise. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "Just do the paperwork. I want to get out of here in this car." 2 hours later, I drove my new Mustang out of the dealership. The roar of the engine, the power under the gas pedal, the ease of control, it was as intoxicating as whiskey. I felt 30 years younger, like I was back in the days of my youth, when the world seemed full of possibilities. On the way home, I stopped at the mall and bought some new clothes. Suits, shirts, jeans, shoes, all the best. It was time to match my new status. By the time I parked the Mustang in the driveway of my new house, it was getting dusk. I pulled the shopping bags out of the trunk, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement across the street. Keith was standing on his porch, watching me with his mouth open. I waved at him, barely containing a smile, and walked into the house. Not an hour later, the doorbell rang. I took my time opening it, anticipating the scene to come. Finally, with a leisurely step, I went to the door and opened it. Keith and Beatrice stood on the threshold. He looked confused, she looked tense, a strange smile on her face. "Dad?" Keith looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. "Was that really you? Who did you expect to see?" I stepped aside. "Come on in, now that you're here." They walked hesitantly into the house, looking around. New furniture, stylish lamps, a big TV on the wall. Everything said that the owner of the house was not short of money. "Dad, this is amazing," Keith continued to look around. "So the rumors are true? Did you really win the lottery?" "Have a seat," I pointed to the couch, ignoring his question. "Would you like something to drink? I've got whiskey, wine, juice." "Wine would be great," Beatrice said hastily, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "If you don't mind." I went into the kitchen and got the bottle of expensive red wine I'd bought yesterday and 3 glasses. When I returned to the living room, I found them in tense silence. Beatrice was nervously adjusting her hair, Keith drumming his fingers on his knee. "So," I said, pouring the wine, "what brings you here?" "Dad," Keith accepted the glass, "we saw you pull up and I couldn't believe my eyes. New house, new car. What's going on?" "I decided to get a change of scenery," I shrugged. "Realized life's too short to deny myself small pleasures." "Little pleasures?" Beatrice laughed nervously. "A $500,000 house and a Mustang are small pleasures?" "For some people," I looked her straight in the eye. "For me right now, yes." Beatrice looked away, took a sip of wine. "Dad, did you really hit the jackpot?" Keith asked again. "The 10 million that was in the paper?" "What would it change if I answered?" I asked calmly. "Would you treat me differently?" Keith blushed, lowered his eyes. "No, of course not. It's all so sudden." "Life is full of surprises," I agreed. "Like being on the street when your own son kicks you out of the house." A heavy silence hung in the room. Beatrice fidgeted on the couch, clearly uncomfortable. Keith clenched his glass so hard his knuckles turned white. "Dad, I already apologized for that," he said at last. "Beatrice and I are both deeply sorry for what happened. It was a terrible mistake." "A mistake," I repeated. "I wonder when exactly you realized that. Before or after you read about the lottery win?" Beatrice shuddered as if I had slapped her. Keith looked like he was about to fall through the ground. "It's not fair, Dad," he said quietly. "I called you before I was sure you'd won. I wanted to make up." "You called me right after you read the article hinting at my winnings," I corrected him. "Not before? Not a call or text in 3 weeks." "Mr. Prescott," Beatrice intervened, her voice sounding almost pleading. "We have indeed made a terrible mistake. I was out of sorts at the time. Stress at work, problems with my parents. I snapped at you, and it's unforgivable." "You're right, Beatrice, it's unforgivable," I agreed. "But I don't hold it against you. You've opened my eyes to a lot of things." They looked at each other, clearly not understanding where I was going with this. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what's really important," I continued. "You did me a favor by kicking me out of the house, made me reevaluate my life, my priorities. We're glad you don't hold it against us," Keith said carefully. Maybe we could start over. Forget past hurts." I looked at my son carefully, trying to see in him the boy I had once loved more than life. But all I saw was a grown man, weak and dependent on his wife's opinion, ready to betray his own father for a quiet life. "Forget?" I shook my head. "No, Keith, I won't forget anything. But that doesn't mean that we can't be civilized neighbors." "Neighbors!" Beatrice almost jumped. "You bought this house so you could live across the street from us?" "Does that bother you?" I asked with a slight smile. "Wouldn't it be nice to have family close by?" She laughed nervously, casting a quick glance at Keith. "No, of course not. It's wonderful. Isn't it, honey?" "Yes, of course it is," Keith agreed hastily. "It's just unexpected." "Life is full of surprises," I repeated. "By the way, have you had dinner yet? I can order something." I have that option now. Thanks, Dad, but we just ate, Keith said, clearly wanting to change the subject. Are you, um, are you planning on doing any more shopping after the house and the car? Maybe, I said evasively. I have so many opportunities now. Maybe a trip. I've always wanted to see Europe. Traveling sounds wonderful. Beatrice took another sip of wine. Keith and I have wanted to go to Europe for a long time too. Maybe someday. Why not now? I suggested it. I have more than enough money. I could pay for a trip for all of us. Beatrice's eyes lit up, and she glanced quickly at Keith. But then she shook her head as if she'd come to her senses. No, we cannot accept such a generous gift. It would be wrong. Why not? I frowned, pretend. Isn't a family supposed to support each other? Help each other when they have the chance? Keith and Beatrice looked at each other again, clearly unsure of what to say. I could almost physically feel their confusion, their inner struggle between greed and remnants of pride. We appreciate your offer, Hugo, Beatrice said at last. But now is not a good time to travel. Keith has a lot of work to do, and I have projects at work. I understand, I nodded. Well, the offer still stands. If you change your mind, let me know. They sat there for about an hour, the conversation awkward, with long pauses and insincere smiles. I talked about my plans for the house, how I wanted to remodel the backyard, install a barbecue, maybe even a small pool. They listened with exaggerated interest, nodding, inserting comments where it seemed appropriate. But I could see Beatrice constantly casting glances at my new TV, at the designer lamp, at the bottle of expensive wine, appraising, estimating the cost, mentally making a list of what she could get if I came back into their lives. Finally, they were going home, citing the late hour. I walked them to the door, watching them cross the street to their house, the house that was once supposed to be my home too. Come by any time, I said to them. I'm in no hurry now. Back in the living room, I sat in a chair by the window, where I had a beautiful view of their house. The light was on in their kitchen, and I could see them talking animatedly about something, gesticulating. Beatrice was proving something. Keith shook his head, then spread his hands as if giving up. I could almost picture their dialogue. She persuades him to restore his relationship with me, not out of love, but out of profit. He hesitates, perhaps feels guilty, but will eventually give in, as he always has. Watching this pantomime, I felt a strange satisfaction. Not joy, no. Something more complex, bittersweet. Revenge had begun to come true, but it didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. That was only the first act, though. There were many more scenes ahead in this play I was directing. The next morning I woke up early. Old habits are hard to eradicate. Decades of rising at 4 in the morning for long hauls had taught my body to wake up at first light. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was in no hurry to get up. I lay in a comfortable bed, enjoying the softness of the mattress, the silence of the big house, the absence of the need to run somewhere, to do something. Later, I went down to the kitchen and made myself a sumptuous breakfast. Scrambled eggs with bacon, buttered toast, freshly brewed coffee. I sat at the table, taking my time, savoring every bite, every sip. Small pleasures that once seemed an unattainable luxury were now part of my daily life. After breakfast, I went out on the porch, sat in the rocking chair I had ordered yesterday from an online store with same-day delivery, sat rocking, watching Keith walk out of his house, get in his car, and drive off to work. He spotted me, waved with an uncertain smile. I waved back, feeling strangely calm. The plan for revenge that had seemed so clear and definite when I'd been living in Mrs. Welch's room was now a little fuzzy. Yes, I'd bought the house across the street from them, showed off my new wealth, watched their reaction. But what next? What exactly was I trying to prove? And to whom? Them or myself? The first week in the new house flew by. I organized the rooms, ordered furniture, gradually transforming the empty space into a real home. In the backyard, I installed a barbecue grill. I'd always dreamed of having my own, but we couldn't afford such luxuries in the apartments where Dora and I lived. Now I could cook steaks right out in the open, enjoying the peace and quiet of my property. Keith and Beatrice didn't bother me after the first visit, although I often noticed them watching me from the windows of their house. Sometimes, as I stepped out onto the porch, I would catch their glances, and they would quickly retreat to the back of the room like children caught off guard. It amused me and made me bitter at the same time. Is this what our relationship has come to? To the point of surveillance and pretense? On the 10th day of my stay in my new home, the doorbell rang. I expected to see another furniture courier, but on the doorstep stood a woman in her 60s, with gray hair gathered in a neat bundle and kind wrinkles around her eyes. In her hands, she held a basket covered with a plaid napkin. "Good morning." Her voice was melodious, with a slight southern accent. "I'm Ruth Chandler. I live 2 doors down. I wanted to welcome my new neighbor. I was a little taken aback by this unexpected visit. In recent years, I'd grown weary of the simple human gestures of kindness, the neighborly reciprocity and hospitality that used to be the norm in small towns like Macon. "Hugo Prescott," I extended my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Likewise, Mr. Prescott," she shook my palm. The handshake was firm for a woman her age. "I baked a blueberry pie. I hope you don't mind sweets." "Quite the opposite," I smiled, accepting the basket. "That's very sweet of you. Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" Ruth said yes without hesitation, as if she'd been expecting an invitation. I led her into the kitchen, which was already fully equipped. I put on the kettle and took 2 cups from the cupboard. "You have a lovely house," Ruth said, looking around. "It's bright and spacious." I could see that it had been lovingly furnished. "Thank you," I felt proud. "I'm new here, and I haven't done everything to my liking yet." "Oh, you've already done a great job." She sat down at the table with her hands in her lap. "I've lived in my house for 25 years, ever since my husband died. Sometimes I think it would be nice to do a complete renovation, but I just can't get around to it." "How long have you been widowed?" I asked, putting a cup of coffee in front of her. "In 1997. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes clouded over for a moment. "Lung cancer. Jack had smoked a lot when he was young, then quit, but it was too late." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "I lost my wife too, 5 years ago. Cancer too." Ruth nodded understandingly. In that moment, we had that special understanding that only people who have experienced a similar loss have. I didn't have to explain what it was like to wake up in an empty bed, to cook a meal for one, to talk to the void in the hope that somewhere they could still hear you. "Any kids?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "Son." I nodded toward the window where Keith's house could be seen. "He lives across the street." "Oh," she said, clearly surprised. "How convenient. Having family around is great." I didn't tell her the whole story. It was too early for that kind of revelation. Instead, I just nodded and turned the conversation back to her. "What about you?" "Daughter in Atlanta, son in California," Ruth said. "They come for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Sometimes on my birthday, if work permits. 3 grandchildren, but they're teenagers, their own lives, their own interests. You know how it is. We got it talking." Ruth was a former English teacher at the local school. She had retired 10 years ago, but continued to run a literary group for seniors at the community center. She loved gardening, classical music, and old movies. Traveled in Europe as a young woman, dreamed of returning someday. "Why don't you go now?" I asked. "When else? If not when you're retired?" She smiled, but there was a slight sadness in her smile. "It's not as interesting alone, and organized tours for retired people are not my thing. Too much fuss, too little freedom." I knew what she was talking about. I'd never liked group activities myself, preferring my own rhythm, my own route. When Ruth was about to leave, I walked her to the door. She turned around at the door. "This Saturday, my neighbors and I are having a little book club. It's nothing formal. We just get together, talk about what we've read, drink wine. Would you like to join us?" I hesitated. It's been a long time since I've been in society. I'm used to small talk, and I haven't read many books in recent years. More and more newspapers and technical magazines on trucking. "Don't worry about books," Ruth added, as if she'd read my mind. "We're discussing Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. I'm sure you're familiar with the story. And if you're not, that's okay. It's the company that counts." "I'd love to come," I said. "Thank you for the invitation." That evening, I went to the bookstore and bought The Old Man and the Sea. I read late into the night, remembering how Dora had once forced me to familiarize myself with the classics. "The intellectual in you is dying, Hugo," she used to say jokingly when she saw me falling asleep over Dickens after a hard day's work. The story of the old fisherman, his struggle with the huge fish and with himself, touched me more than I expected. Perhaps now, at my age, I understood better his tenacity, his pride, his loneliness. Saturday night, I put on my new shirt, jeans I hadn't yet had time to update, and headed to Ruth's house. On the way, I noticed Beatrice looking out the window. She looked away quickly, but I could see the look of surprise on her face. She must be wondering where her father-in-law was going on a Saturday night. Dressed up. The book club was a pleasant group of five. Ruth herself, an elderly Anderson couple from the next block, Leonard, a former math professor, and me. We sat in Ruth's cozy living room, drinking wine and discussing the book. Or rather, they were discussing, and I was mostly listening, sometimes inserting comments about the main character's fortitude, his unwillingness to give up even in a hopeless situation. "That's what human life is all about, isn't it?" Leonard remarked. "We know we're going to lose in the end, but we keep fighting." "But it's not the outcome that matters," Ruth added, looking at me. "How we handle adversity defines who we are." I nodded, thinking about my own struggles, how I'd been thrown out on the street, how I'd survived my son's betrayal, how I'd found the strength to start over. Maybe that was the point. Not to win, but not to give up. After the discussion, we moved on to lighter topics. Ruth made dinner, simple but delicious: baked chicken, potato salad, and apple pie for dessert. I helped set the table, and our hands accidentally touched as we both reached for the same plate. Ruth was embarrassed, but she didn't pull away. We stood looking into each other's eyes for a moment, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A slight excitement, a warmth, an interest in another person. The evening ended late. I volunteered to help Ruth with the dishes when the other guests had gone. We worked side by side in silence, only occasionally exchanging remarks. There was something very homey and cozy about it, as if we'd been doing it for years. "Thank you for tonight," I said, when the last plate was wiped and put away in the cupboard. "I haven't had such a good time in a long time." "I'm glad you came," she smiled. "We're discussing The Great Gatsby next Saturday. Would you like to join us?" "I'd love to," I nodded. "But maybe we could meet earlier. For example, for coffee." The suggestion came out of the blue. I hadn't planned it. Ruth froze for a moment, and I began to regret my impulsiveness. But then she smiled, and the wrinkles around her eyes gathered into rays. "I'd love to. Tomorrow at 3 at Martha's Cafe?" I agreed, feeling like a teenager after a first date, excited and a little silly. At 67. Walking back home, I noticed the lights in the windows of Keith's house. Despite the late hour, they were still awake. I wondered if they had been waiting for me to return. Were they watching me from behind the curtains? The thought made me chuckle. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. I was not going to give them any more account of my life. I spent the next day looking forward to seeing Ruth. I picked out a neater shirt, shined my shoes, even bought a new cologne. At 2:30, I got into my Mustang and drove to Martha's Cafe, a small place in downtown Macon, known for its pies and relaxed atmosphere. Ruth was already waiting for me at a table by the window. She was wearing a blue dress with a white collar, her hair in waves instead of the usual bun. She looked younger, fresher, and I involuntarily admired her. We talked about everything, about books, about music, about the trips we'd taken, and the ones we'd dreamed of. I told her about my work as a truck driver, the long drives across the country, the sunsets I'd seen while driving. She listened with genuine interest, asked questions, laughed at my stories about roadside cafes and strange fellow travelers. "How did you end up in the house across the street from your son?" she asked. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" I hesitated. I didn't want to mar our meeting with a story of betrayal and revenge. But I didn't want to lie to Ruth either. "It's a long story," I said, "and not a very pleasant one. Maybe I'll tell it sometime, but not tonight." She nodded understandingly, not insisting. She nodded understandingly, not insisting. Another quality I valued in her, the ability not to overstep her bounds. We sat in the cafe for almost 3 hours. When we got outside, it was starting to get dark. I offered her a ride home, and she accepted. In the car, she marveled at the powerful roar of the engine, the comfortable seats, the modern control panel. "I've never ridden in a car like this," she admitted. "My late husband preferred practical cars, and my current Ford is old but reliable. Maybe you'd like to go for a drive this weekend? I suggested it. There are some beautiful places around Macon. I'd love to, her eyes sparkled. I hadn't been out of town in a long time. I walked Ruth to the door of her house. She touched my hand lightly, a simple gesture, but it made my body feel warm. I watched her enter the house and thought about how strange life was. A month ago, I was a lonely, penniless old man, thrown out on the street by my son. Now I had a house, a car, and possibly the start of a new relationship. When I got home, Keith was waiting for me on the porch. He was sitting on the steps, rubbing his hands together nervously, and jumped up when he saw me. "Dad, it's about time. I've been waiting for an hour." "What's wrong?" I asked, not trying to hide my irritation. His arrival had shattered the fragile sense of happiness I'd felt since I'd met Ruth. "It's nothing," he assured me hastily. "It's just that Beatrice and I wanted to invite you to dinner." This Friday, I looked at my son more closely. He looked tense, uncertain, as if he was afraid of rejection. "Why?" I asked him directly. "What do you mean, why?" He laughed nervously. "You're my father. We're family. Do we need a special reason?" "I think I used to," I said, "when you threw me out on the street." Keith gritted his teeth like a toothache. "Dad, we've talked about this. Beatrice and I are sorry about what happened. It was a terrible mistake. We want to make it right." I looked at him and saw not a grown man, but a little boy caught in a lie. The same running eyes, the same nervous gestures. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll be there for dinner. 7 o'clock?" "Yeah, 7 is great." He was visibly relaxed. "Beatrice will make your favorite lasagna." "How would Beatrice know what my favorite lasagna is?" I grinned. We'd barely spoken a word the whole time. "Well, I told her," he said, embarrassed. "She's trying really hard, Dad. She really is." I nodded, not wanting to continue this conversation. I opened the door to my house. "See you Friday, Keith." All week I'd seen Beatrice running around the store, carrying grocery bags, wiping down windows, changing curtains, preparing for the reception as if she were expecting royalty, not the father-in-law she'd recently driven out of the house. Friday night I wore simple jeans and a shirt. I didn't want to dress up for this performance. I grabbed a bottle of wine from my growing stockpile and crossed the street at 7 o'clock sharp. Beatrice opened the door, beaming with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. She was wearing a new dress, her hair styled, her makeup flawless. "Hugo, how glad we are to see you." She spoke louder than usual, as if she were playing the part of a welcoming hostess in a school play. "Come in, come in. Keith, look who's here." Keith appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He was smiling too, but his smile seemed more genuine, albeit nervous. "Hey, Dad. Thanks for coming over." I held out a bottle of wine, which Beatrice immediately grabbed, oohing and eyeing in delight. "Oh, Chateau Margaux. It's such an expensive wine. You shouldn't have." "It's nothing," I said. "I could afford it now." The house looked spotless. Not a speck of dust, not a speck of dust. There were candles on the living room table, porcelain plates I'd never seen before, silverware. Everything told me that this dinner had been carefully planned. "Sit down, sit down," Beatrice pointed to a chair. "I'll get an aperitif." She went into the kitchen, and Keith sat down opposite me, still rubbing his towel. "How are you doing, Dad?" he asked. "I've seen you go out a lot. Exploring the neighborhood?" "You could say that." I didn't tell him about Ruth. "How's work going?" "It's good," he perked up. "I've been promoted to senior specialist. It's more responsibility, but it's better pay." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. Despite all our problems, I was still proud of my son's success. Beatrice returned with a tray of wine glasses and a plate of canapes. "I've opened your wine, Hugo," she said. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to savor such an exquisite drink right away." "Of course," I took the glass. "What shall we drink to?" "To family," Keith said, raising his glass. "To being together again." We clinked glasses. I took a sip, watching them over the top of my glass. They were both tense, like they were waiting for something. Dinner passed in a strange, tense atmosphere. Beatrice went on and on about my house, my car, my new sweater, anything that could be praised. Keith chimed in with comments about how great it was that I could afford all these things now. By the way, Dad, he said, as if by the way, as we moved on to dessert, I was thinking, remember you were talking about traveling to Europe? I remember. I could see where he was going with this. Well, Beatrice and I have our wedding anniversary next month. 5 years is a little anniversary, and we were thinking, maybe we could celebrate it together. The three of us going to Europe. As a family, that's it. Now I get the whole dinner, compliments, fake joy of meeting you. Sounds like fun. I put my fork down. And where exactly would you like to go? Oh, we've been dreaming of Paris for a long time, Beatrice interjected. The Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, walking along the Seine. It's so romantic. And then we could go to Italy, said Kit. Rome, Venice. I've always wanted to see the Colosseum. How much do you think a trip like that would cost? I asked directly. They looked at each other, obviously not expecting such a question. Well, for 3 people, with good hotels, excursions. Beatrice pretended to count in her mind. Maybe 20 or 30,000? But that's not a problem, is it? After your, happy accident. Not a problem indeed, I agreed. But I wondered why you thought I wanted to spend that money on you. After everything that's happened? Silence. Beatrice froze with her mouth open. Keith lowered his eyes. Dad, we apologized, he said quietly at last. We admitted our mistake. We did, I nodded. After we found out we won. It's an amazing coincidence, don't you think? You've got it all wrong, Hugo, Beatrice interjected. Our apologies are sincere. We are truly sorry for what happened, and we want a fresh start. A fresh start, I repeated. And you're starting with a trip to Europe at my expense? That's an interesting approach. It doesn't have to be Europe, Beatrice said quickly. We could go somewhere closer, maybe the Caribbean, or... It's not about the destination, Beatrice, I interrupted her. The point is that you threw me out of the house, and now that you found out about the money, you're suddenly thinking about family values. That's unconvincing, to say the least. Dad, I understand how you feel. Keith finally looked up. But we really want to make things right. Yes, maybe it's wrong to start by asking for a trip, but we just thought it would be a good way to get close again, to spend time together. On me, I finished for him. Well, you have the means now, he shrugged. And you know we can't afford a trip like this. When I couldn't afford a roof over my head, it didn't bother you much, I said. Beatrice's eyes narrowed and she turned red. Are you going to bring it up every chance you get? Her voice had lost its pretended softness. Yes, we made a mistake. Yes, we apologize. What else do you want to hear? Nothing. I calmly pushed my plate away. I don't want to hear anything, because I know that whatever you say now, it won't be sincere. You're only interested in my money, not me. That's not true, Dad, Keith exclaimed. You're my father. I love you. Do you? I looked him in the eye. Then why did you let your wife kick me out of the house? Why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you call, look for me, worry about me for 3 weeks? Is this how your love manifests itself? He was silent, unable to find an answer. Beatrice sat with her arms crossed over her chest, her face a mixture of anger and disappointment. I think I should go, I said, getting up from the table. Thank you for dinner. It was informative. Dad, wait. Keith jumped up too. Don't go like that. Let's talk. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to discuss, Keith, I shook my head. You've shown your true intentions, and I heard them. No, I'm not taking you to Europe. I'm not taking you anywhere. My money is my money. I earned it through my misfortune, and I will spend it as I see fit. With these words, I headed for the door. Keith followed me, still saying something, but I wasn't listening. I walked outside, crossed the road, and entered my house. Only when I closed the door behind me did I let myself take a deep breath. Strangely, I felt no anger or resentment, just tiredness and something akin to relief. Like a chapter in my life had finally closed. Now I knew exactly what their apology, their sudden concern, their desire for a fresh start was worth. I sat down in a chair by the window that overlooked their house. The light was on in the windows and I could make out 2 figures. They were clearly arguing. Beatrice was flailing her arms and Keith was trying to calm her down. She was probably blaming him for the failure of their plan, for not being able to persuade her father to splurge on a luxury trip. I turned away from the window. I didn't want to watch it anymore. Didn't want to be part of their drama. I had a life of my own now. A new home, new opportunities, new acquaintances, and maybe a new feeling that was timidly breaking through the thick of old hurts and disappointments. I picked up the phone and dialed Ruth's number. "Didn't wake you?" I asked when she answered. "No, I'm still reading." Her voice sounded warm, cozy. "What's wrong?" "Nothing much," I smiled. "Just thinking about our trip out of town. How about tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" She thought for a moment. "Yes, I'm free tomorrow. Where shall we go?" "There's a place about 40 miles from here," I said. "A lake in the mountains, beautiful view, nice restaurant on the shore. I've always wanted to go there." "Sounds wonderful," I could hear the smile in her voice. "What time can you pick me up?" 10 o'clock, I suggested. It was going to be a sunny day. 10 o'clock is perfect, she agreed. I'll be waiting. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the evening fade away, replaced by the anticipation of tomorrow. Maybe that was the real revenge, not to hurt those who hurt you, but to be happy in spite of them, to live life to the fullest, to find joy where they didn't see it. With that thought, I went to bed, for the first time in a long time not thinking about Keith, Beatrice, and their attempts to manipulate me. Tomorrow was a new day, and I was going to live it my way. After that trip to the lake, my relationship with Ruth had grown even warmer. We spent most of our free time together, and I was slowly getting used to the idea of having someone close in my life again. Someone I could trust. Someone with whom I could share my thoughts without fear of being judged or ridiculed. Over the past month, I had run into Keith and Beatrice a few more times, mostly casually, when leaving the house or at the local supermarket. They were emphatically polite but cold. After the failure of their plan to travel at my expense, they must have realized that additional attempts to manipulate me were futile, or perhaps they were simply devising a new strategy. Either way, I was glad for the temporary respite. Ruth had talked several times about reconciling with her son, but she did so tactfully without pressure. "Life is too short for long grudges, Hugo," she said, and I couldn't disagree. But at the same time, I realized that some wounds are too deep to be healed simply by good intentions, especially if those intentions are questionable. In midsummer, when the heat in Macon had become almost unbearable, Ruth and I were sitting on my veranda, sipping iced lemonade. I'd just finished reading the latest news in the paper. It was cooler in Europe. Lots of rain. Tourists complaining about ruined vacations. "You know," I said, putting the paper aside, "I've always wanted to see Paris. The Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, the Seine. Dora wanted to go too, but we kept putting it off. First the children, then work, then illness." Ruth turned to me, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "I had a similar story with Jack." She nodded. "We'd been saving up for a trip to Italy, but we'd never gotten around to it. It seemed like there was still a long way to go." We were both silent, thinking about unfulfilled dreams, missed opportunities. But now I had the time and the means. What was stopping me from realizing this dream? "Let's go," I said suddenly. "Right now." Well, not right now, of course, but soon. Paris first, then Italy. We can take Switzerland, Germany, anything we want. Ruth laughed, thinking I was joking. But when she saw the serious look on my face, she faltered. Are you really suggesting we go to Europe? Just the two of us?" "Why not?" I shrugged. "We're both healthy, energized, free. I have money. What are we waiting for?" Ruth hesitated, biting her lip, a habit I'd noticed before when she was nervous. "It's a very generous offer, Hugo," she said at last. "But I can't let you pay for such an expensive trip for me." "Why not?" I wondered. "What's wrong with giving a gift to someone you care about?" The words came out of my mouth, but I didn't regret them. Ruth had really become dear to me. Her eyes widened and her cheeks flushed slightly. Do you care for me?" "Very much," I answered simply. "You've given me back my zest for life, Ruth. You showed me that after everything that had happened, it was still possible to be happy, to enjoy the simple things. I want to thank you, and I want to share this dream with you." She looked at me for a long time, as if seeing me for the first time. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, let's go to Europe. We spent the next 2 weeks worrying about paperwork, hotel reservations, and itineraries. We decided to start with Paris, then visit southern France, Switzerland, northern Italy. We had 3 weeks for everything, enough time to see the main sights but not to get tired of the road. Ruth insisted on paying at least part of the expenses, and I agreed, realizing it was a matter of dignity for her. We decided that she would take care of the cafe lunches and small souvenirs, and I would pay for the flight, hotels, and car rental. We bought tickets for August 15, departing Atlanta early in the morning, with arrival in Paris the next morning local time. I booked a small hotel in the center of the city, near the Eiffel Tower, overlooking the Seine. I wanted Ruth's first introduction to Paris to be unforgettable. The day before I left, I started packing my bags. I bought a new traveling closet. Nothing fancy, but good quality and comfortable. Ruth was also prepared. I saw her carrying boxes from clothing stores out of the house. In the evening, when I finished packing, I went out on the porch for some fresh air. There were voices coming from the house across the street. Keith and Beatrice were apparently arguing. It had become a common occurrence lately. I didn't know what the cause of their quarrel was, nor did I want to know. Their lives no longer concerned me, just as my life no longer concerned them. The next morning I woke up early before dawn. I took a quick shower, got dressed, double-checked my documents and money. Our flight was at 10 in the morning, but given the drive to Atlanta and the need to get to the airport early, I had to leave no later than 6. I carried the suitcases out onto the porch, then pulled the Mustang up to the house. The trunk of the sports car wasn't very roomy, but it was big enough for 2 suitcases. I stowed my stuff neatly, checked to make sure I had everything, and went back into the house for the last few things. It was about 6:30 when I went out on the porch again, with a small bag over my shoulder, and locked the door. The morning was quiet, cool, with a light mist drifting over the ground. Perfect weather for the start of a trip. I got in the car, started the engine. The Mustang gave a low growl that echoed down the sleepy street. I had to pick up Ruth, and then I was going straight to the airport for new experiences and adventures. I was about to leave when the door of the house across the street opened, and Keith came running out on the porch. He was in his house clothes, disheveled, as if he had just jumped out of bed. Behind him, pulling on a robe, was Beatrice. "Dad, wait!" Keith rushed across the street, waving his arms. "Wait a second." I reluctantly rolled down the window. I didn't want to start the day with an unpleasant conversation, but I couldn't just drive away pretending I hadn't heard. "Good morning, Keith," I said in a neutral tone. "Something urgent? You're leaving?" He was breathing hard as if he'd run a mile from the house to the car. "How long?" 3 weeks, I answered. "A vacation in Europe." At the word Europe, Beatrice, who had already arrived and was standing a little behind Keith, visibly tensed. Her face contorted with a grimace, a mixture of envy and disappointment. "To Europe?" she asked again. "Alone?" "No, with Ruth Chandler. She's a neighbor, lives 2 doors down. We became friends." Keith ran his hand nervously through his hair, a gesture he'd learned from me as a child. "Dad, can we talk? Before you leave? It's important." I looked at my watch. I had 15 minutes before my appointment with Ruth. Just enough time for a short talk, but no more. "I don't have much time, Keith. What did you want to say?" He paced from foot to foot, clearly hesitant to begin. Beatrice pushed him back impatiently. I mean, he stammered. "I wanted to apologize. A real one, not like the other day. I was a terrible son, Dad. The way I let you get treated. It's unforgivable. I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be. But maybe we could try to make things right? Start over?" I looked at my son carefully, trying to see if he was sincere. There was a pleading look in his eyes, but what was behind it? Real remorse or another attempt at manipulation? "Why now, Keith?" I asked bluntly. "Why not a week ago, not a month, not right after that dinner when you tried to extort money from me for the trip?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. It took me a while to realize it, to realize what I'd done. And the realization came the moment you saw me leaving for Europe with another man. I didn't hide my skepticism. Quite a convenient coincidence, don't you think? Beatrice stepped forward, her face flaming with anger. You're not being fair, Hugo. Keith has really been worried all this time. He hasn't slept well. He hasn't eaten much. Beatrice, I raised my hand to stop her. I'm talking to my son. If he's truly repentant, let him speak for himself, not hide behind your skirt. She opened her mouth to object, but Keith put his hand on her shoulder, reassuring her. Dad, I understand your hesitation, he said quietly. If I were you, I wouldn't believe it either. But I'm really sorry, and I want to make it right. Maybe when you get back from your trip, we can talk. Calmly, without accusations, just like father and son. I looked at him and saw that little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the one I'd comforted when he fell and shattered his knees, the one I'd spent rare weekends fishing with. Somewhere deep inside that grown, weak man was still my son. But was he sincere now? Did he really want to fix our relationship, or was he just afraid of losing his last chance at access to my money? We'll talk when I get back, I said finally. But I'm not promising anything, Keith. The trust you've broken isn't easy to rebuild. He nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Thanks, Dad. That's all I'm asking for. A chance. I nodded back and was about to raise the window when Beatrice suddenly stepped forward, putting her hand on the car door. Where exactly are you going in Europe? She asked with a casualness. Paris, perhaps. Keith and I have been dreaming of going there for so long. And then I realized it wasn't a sudden act of remorse on Keith's part, but another plan. They were hoping that, moved by my son's sincere apology, I would offer to join them on our trip at the last minute. That's why they jumped out of the house at the sound of the engine starting. They were afraid of being late, of missing their chance. I didn't feel angry, but tired. Did they really think I was that naive, that I wouldn't see their true motives? Yes, to Paris, I answered dryly, and then Italy, Rome, Venice, Florence. Beatrice's eyes lit up with an eager gleam. How marvelous. You know, Keith and I have always dreamed of seeing the Colosseum. Perhaps? No, I interrupted her. Don't even think about it. This is my trip with Ruth, just the two of us. Her face contorted with disappointment mixed with anger. But we're family. How can you take some strange woman with you and not your own son? Ruth is not a stranger, I answered calmly. She's a person who accepted me for who I am, without second thoughts or ulterior motives. A person who didn't throw me out on the street in my hour of need, but reached out to me. Unlike some. Beatrice recoiled as if I'd hit her. Keith stood with his head down, not looking me in the eye. I've got to go, I said, lifting the glass. Ruth's waiting. We'll talk when I get back. I put the car in gear and slowly pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing on the sidewalk, confused, angry, disappointed. Two people who had sacrificed real family ties for immediate gain, and now regretted not the act, but the consequences. Ruth was already waiting for me outside her house with her suitcase at her feet. She waved at me, smiling, and that smile immediately erased all unpleasant thoughts of the recent conversation. I stopped and got out to help her with her luggage. Good morning, she kissed me on the cheek. Ready for your adventure? More than ever, I smiled back. We stowed her suitcase in the trunk, and I opened the door for her. Before I got behind the wheel myself, I looked around. Keith and Beatrice were still standing on the sidewalk, watching us. I raised my hand in a gesture of farewell. Not to them, but to the past they represented. That period of my life when I'd let others define my worth, when I'd swallowed grudges and endured humiliation for the illusion of marital well-being. As I got behind the wheel, I turned to Ruth. Shall we go to the airport? To the airport, she nodded, and in her eyes I saw the same anticipation of adventure that I felt. I started the engine, and the Mustang started up smoothly. We drove through the morning Macon, past familiar streets and houses, past places where I'd spent most of my life. But there was a new chapter ahead. Paris, Rome, Venice, new experiences, new opportunities. And most importantly, there was the person I wanted to share all these moments with. As we pulled onto the highway to Atlanta, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was like I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying around for years. The revenge I'd been planning for so long wasn't about ostentatious luxury or rubbing Keith and Beatrice's nose in their mistake. The real revenge was to live life to the fullest in spite of their betrayal, to build their happiness without looking back on past wrongs, to move forward, not stagnate, feeding her soul with bitterness and disappointment. Ruth put her hand on mine, squeezing my fingers lightly. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I was thinking about how strange life is," I said. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to gain something really valuable." She smiled understandingly and turned back to the window, watching the roadside scenery flicker by. We were racing toward new horizons, leaving Macon behind with its familiar streets, houses, and people. Leaving behind Keith and Beatrice, who remained standing on the sidewalk, powerless to change anything, forced to see every day what they had lost with their own hands. The drive to the airport took a little over an hour. We turned in the Mustang to the long-term parking lot, checked in, went through all the formalities, and found ourselves in the waiting room. It was still almost 2 hours before the flight. "Are you excited?" Ruth asked me as we sat in the cafe sipping coffee. "A little," I admitted. It was my first time flying across the ocean after all. The first real trip of my life. "For me too," she put her hand over mine. "But we'll get through this. Together. Together." The words sounded like a promise, like hope for a future I was no longer looking forward to. After Dora died, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. Then, after Keith's betrayal, I thought I'd devote myself to revenge. Now I was sitting in an airport with a woman who had become closer to me in a short time than anyone I'd known in years, preparing for a trip I'd only dreamed of before. Life is indeed full of surprises, and the biggest surprise of all is that even after the toughest challenges, even when it seems like everything is lost, there is always a chance to start over, to build something new on the ruins of the old, to find happiness where you least expect it. "To new beginnings," I lifted my coffee cup. "To new beginnings," Ruth echoed, and we clinked our cups as if they were champagne glasses. Paris, the city of love and art, was ahead of us, and beyond that, many other cities, countries, and experiences. A new life that I intended to live to the fullest, savoring every moment. And if this was revenge, it was the sweetest revenge possible.